Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Dr. Claude Anderson said it best: everyone's always trying to swing off the coattails of our suffering, because they all want to find a way to give some thin veneer of counterfeit legitimacy to their own feeble gripes, as compared to our very real grievances. We all understand how ridiculous it is when the Republicans try to claim Dr. King wouldn't support reparations, or that white racists pushing phony affirmative action lawsuits are somehow like Rosa Parks. We all recognize that for the racist fraud that it is. But the white left does the same scam: the propaganda offensive to create a phony link between the civil rights movement and abortion. And there's a very long, very putrid history of black people who will gladly try to find some way to link this or that white special interest issue to the civil rights movement and spit in our faces while doing it. As an example, Bayard Rustin, who we all recognize as having been an agent who infiltrated the civil rights movement and got right next to Dr. King, an unfortunate choice of words on my part, come to think of it. But Bayard Rustin is being praised and lionized, and the white media is heaping all of these phony platitudes on the man, calling him the one responsible for the March on Washington, and basically saying that he was the brains of the civil rights movement. It's the standard white media ploy of trying to credentialize one of their agents. Now, why would they be lauding this guy who most folks hadn't really even heard of? Case in point, look at reparations. We're fighting for the reparations we're owed. What did Bayard Rustin think of reparations? In 1969, barely a year after Dr. King was assassinated, Bayard Rustin gave an interview to the New York Times in which he said he opposed reparations outright. Quote, "If my great-grandfather picked cotton for 50 years, then he may deserve some money, but he's dead and gone and nobody owes me anything." First of all, this scumbag says if his grandfather picked cotton. What did he think his grandfather was doing? Maybe laying up in the big house with Massa, come to think of it. And then he said his grandfather may deserve some money. May? His grandfather may deserve some money for 50 years, his entire life taken away from him in servitude, and he may deserve some money? May? That shows you how much contempt Bayard Rustin has for his own grandfather. And if that's how he regards his own grandfather, how do you think he regards the rest of black society? If Bayard Rustin had been around in the 19th century, he would have said that his grandfather didn't need reparations. All he would need is an apology. Thank you, Jonathan Capehart. And that's what Bayard Rustin said. If his grandfather was enslaved for 50 years, a prisoner against his will, then he may deserve some money. Spoken like any other white supremacist you can name, didn't he? You still want to doubt that this guy was an agent? That every word that came out of his mouth was put there by white power? And because I know the lead paint slurping denizens of the taken out of context crowd lurk around here, in the book Time on Two Crosses, which was a compilation of Bayard Rustin's asinine rantings, when talking about reparations, he called advocating for it corrupting. He bemoaned that reparations would, quote, isolate blacks from the white poor with whom they have common interests. The call for $3 billion in reparations demeans the integrity of blacks and exploits the self-demeaning guilt of whites. It is insulting to Negroes to offer them reparations for past generations of suffering, as if the balance of an irreparable past could be set straight with a handout. Reparations would isolate black people from the white poor. The white poor were the ones hanging black people. They were the ones lynching black people, not the rich whites. Not that the rich whites had a problem with it, but the ones who were actually out there doing the dirty work were the white poor. It wasn't the Rockefellers who were firebombing black churches, and if he objected to black folks getting $3 billion, why, he would have lost his pretty little head if he had heard that in 2022, the figure now stands at $20 trillion. Yeah, that compound interest sure does add up now, don't it? But the most galling thing of all was when this bootlick bastard wrote that for us to demand what we're owed would be to exploit the self-demeaning guilt of whites. That's just a backhanded way of saying that white society did nothing wrong to black people. Why, you're just making them feel put upon. Tucker Carlson and Christopher Rufo couldn't have told a lie any bigger than that. In fact, Rustin's anti-black rhetoric is so vile that right-wing trash like the Afro-Latino immigrant Coleman Cruz, who prefers to use the last name Hughes, wrote a so-called editorial praising Rustin for opposing affirmative action. That's just how out of touch with the black community Bayard Rustin was. Even white supremacists running around today, they're like, oh, this is perfect. These are perfect talking points. Yeah, you wonder who he got them from. You'll recall that, like Bayard Rustin, Coleman Cruz also opposes reparations, even though he wouldn't qualify for it anyway. But I'm sure that you probably notice a pattern forming. Bayard Rustin, Jonathan putting on his Cape Heart, Coleman Cruz. They don't identify themselves as black. They identify themselves as LGBT. These guys all believe that their sexual orientation is what defines them, not their skin color. That's why they all sound the same. That's the job of these bootlicking sellouts, whether they're working for white paymasters on the left or the right. They say the things that their white bosses can't. Things that would get their white leftist or white rightist paymasters in trouble if they tried it. That white guilt phony talking point, that's the kind of lie you expect to hear from the Fox News crowd. It's a made-up phrase that's meant to signal to white racists that doing the moral thing is nothing more than black people guilting you into something. As if white society never did black people any wrong, and as if they're not continuing to perpetuate the racist American social order that we suffer under today. This is what Bayard Rustin wrote. This is what he believed. While Dr. King was saying that we were coming to get our check, and saying that it would cost billions of dollars to set things to rights, Bayard Rustin was saying reparations was a ridiculous idea, and he opposed it. Dr. King put his life on the line and eventually gave his life for ideals such as reparations. Bayard Rustin, who we can all agree was an agent, he spent his life fighting Dr. King. Bayard Rustin is lauded by the white media for marching with Dr. King, and they try to throw dirt on the movement by claiming that Bayard Rustin was sidelined because he was gay. The only person, by the way, who ever said that was Bayard Rustin himself. Nobody else ever said, oh, we don't want no gay folks around here. Now that you've seen what Bayard Rustin was saying to global white media like the New York Times in the 1960s, he didn't wait until the 1980s or something to say this. He was saying this back in the 60s. Now that you've seen what he was saying, do you still think that his homosexuality was the reason that the civil rights movement wanted to keep this guy at arm's length? Because you know James Baldwin was never sidelined. Bayard Rustin was suspect from the jump. They knew they couldn't trust him. He was fighting against them. They were being shot at, imprisoned, bombed, targeted by the government, and here this clown is fighting against everything they were fighting for. But that's why the white media loves him so much. Now we know why they lauded him and praised him to the hilt, and they're trying to rewrite our history and make it where Bayard Rustin was the brains of the civil rights movement, and everything Dr. King did, well, that was all Bayard Rustin anyway. And you have both the white right and the white left pushing this lie for their own reasons. Isn't it interesting how both the white right and the white left can use Bayard Rustin with seemingly no contradiction between the two? That tells you everything you need to know about him. And Rustin's duplicity and treachery became only more bold and prevalent as the years passed. By the 1980s, he put aside all pretense of ever having been for black empowerment. He came out, no pun intended, as a full-fledged anti-black racist when he gave his speeches in New York City saying that gay rights were the central struggle of our time, the central struggle for democracy, and the central struggle for human rights. But the topper was when he gave a little speech that he called "The New Niggers Are Gay," in which he declared, today blacks are no longer the litmus paper or the barometer of social change. Blacks are in every segment of society, and there are laws that help to protect them from racial discrimination. The new niggers are gay. It is in this sense that gay people are the new barometer for social change. The question of social change should be framed with the most vulnerable group in mind, gay people. Now, he said that in 1986. That was only 1 year after the massacre in Philadelphia, where the race soldiers, calling themselves the Philadelphia PD, bombed the residents of Move. I don't think the police ever bombed any gay bathhouses or gay nightclubs, did they? And gays are not the most vulnerable in the society, never have been, especially not white gays. Just ask Ed Buck about that one. All they have to do is say that they're heterosexual and nobody bothers them. In fact, most of the time they ain't even got to say it. Please tell me, if Dr. King could have avoided being discriminated against by merely not telling anyone he was black, to make a comparison between sexual orientation, which nobody can determine unless you tell them, and race, which is obvious to everyone simply by looking, is not just dishonest, it's a lie. But that's what Bayard Rustin said. Bayard Rustin was a liar, a traitor to the movement, and a slave. Full stop. He was Stephen from Django. He was the sellout and the traitor who betrayed all our uprisings and revolts. Here we are talking about what black people are owed. Dr. King talking about the billions of dollars that would have to change hands in order to get any sort of meaningful change. And meanwhile, what was Bayard Rustin doing at that exact same moment? He was saying that he wasn't owed anything, and also saying that black people didn't need reparations. Why? It would be demeaning to our integrity, an insult to Negroes. And worst of all, it would be guilt-tripping white people, which is what that white guilt garbage was about. And then by the end of his life, he was spitting on the very black struggle that he had infiltrated, declaring that black people don't matter and all that matters is whether or not society accepts your sexual preference. When you hear us talk about Negroes who are willing to sell their souls for interracial sexual access, Bayard Rustin is exactly the kind of Negro we're talking about. By the way, you'll recall that Barack Obama awarded Bayard Rustin the Presidential Medal of Freedom, posthumously, of course. So you got Bayard Rustin, Jonathan putting on his cape heart, Coleman Cruz, and Barack Obama. The civil rights movement never invoked the suffragist movement. The Black Power movement never invoked the Native American activism of the 70s or tried to ride on their coattails. We don't reach out for other groups to compare ourselves to when we're standing up for ourselves. We don't need to. Our arguments stand on their own merits and for their own reasons. No one else's condition or situation even comes close to comparing to ours. So you see, it doesn't matter if it's abortion or some of these other issues. If it's something that white power is interested in, they'll go ahead and get one of their bought and paid for bootlicks to come among us or to stand in front of their white media cameras and say, black people aren't the biggest issue you need to be thinking about. You need to be thinking about this social issue over here. And as putrid and sickening as Bayard Rustin was, we still see it today. White power still has Negroes on the payroll whose job it is to twist and distort our struggle and say that everyone else are the inheritors of our moral legitimacy, even the people who were and are oppressing us. That's the reason why we got to call this out when we see it. The diluting of our oppression and the abuse and the murders that we suffer daily that are carried out with impunity, that are in fact celebrated by the white media and politicians that they never do with anyone else. And yet we got these Negroes who are only too jolly to be trying to wave the flag for everything and everyone except for us. And the white media expects us to sit on our hands while they try to claim that these are our spokespeople, these are people who come from our ranks and speak for us like hell. With leaders like this, who needs white supremacy? Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Braga Time, Starlet Thompson, Radia Bay, Chaz, and Malik Phillips. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.